So clearly we have seen the definition of containership, because generally when you go for reusable mechanisms, we have mainly two kind of reuse mechanisms in Python. The first one we have discussed earlier, which is having has a relationship. When you go for the second one, which is nothing but inheritance, because generally these reuse mechanisms play a very vital role, because the general usage of inheritance is mainly for code reusability, because it is very necessary and very important when you go for application development or a software development. Because when I create a feature, when I create class of features, and if my another programmer wants to build the same kind of logic, he need not build in another class, he can use my property. So that is where we have inheritance and containership. So now let's understand about inheritance, because when you go for inheritance, it is simple. It refers to defining a new class with little or no modification. That's where you have derived class and base class. When you say base class, that is parent class. When you say derived, it is taking properties from the parent. So that is where base and derived, it is very important when you go for any application development. That is the reason object oriented programming systems play a very vital role, and that's made Java for complete for web applications and mobile app. Even Python, it uses oops concept when you are trying to build a web application. That is the reason code reusability play a very vital role in software development. No worries, we'll be working on an example by taking teacher and student, where again we use the concept of modules, which you'll clearly understand. But before that, let's see the syntax of inheritance. How do you declare a base class and a derived class? When you go for base class, you see, you define class of base class and you define the body of base class. And when you go for class derived class, class A, class B, but you are defining base class as an object to class B. Now what happens? Clearly, all the objects and methods from the base class can be used with the derived class, and even we have some method overriding, constructor overriding, all those things which we'll be discussing in detail. But make sure you need to pass that as an object, and that's where we have types of inheritance, where clearly it is of three types, which is single, multiple and multi-level. If you clearly observe here, I have given some set of images also. When you go for single inheritance, it is like a fingerprint. When you go for multiple inheritance, it is like a DNA structure. When you go for multi-level, it's like arrows, level by level. Why? Can you just think? Because when you go for single inheritance, there is only one unique fingerprint for every person. That means there is only one base class. There can be n number of derived classes taking that properties. So one parent, you can have multiple derived classes taking that property. When you go for multiple inheritance, think as a mother and father. So child is taking both mother and father properties. So that's where you can take multiple inheritance. It is derived from two base classes, parents, mother and father. When you go for multi-level, it is level by level. You see class A, class B, class C. You read it as class B of A. You go for class C of B. So no worries, we'll be discussing in detail about each one of them. But first, let's take a simple program. How do we understand the concept of where we use the features of existing class in creating another own class? So for that reason, I'll build a simple program where first I'll create a teacher class and I'll just store in a Python file, and in another file I want to access those methods, right? So I'll be opening my previous shell, but what do I do is I'll just create a new file. So because I just want to use it as a module, right? So what do? I'll just go for file and new file, and I'll just save it as some name as teacher.py, because I just wanted to create a Python program with the teacher class, because I just wanted to illustrate the importance of inheritance. Illustrate the importance of inheritance, because we'll be doing in two versions. Then you'll understand what is the importance of reusability here and what made people shift towards it. That's where the importance you try to clearly see. Illustrate the importance of inheritance, because next we'll be discussing about single, multiple, multi-level. But before that, you need to know why should we go for inheritance property, because in containership you are writing the department object. If you take the previous example, department is contained in employee, but now we are going in another way. So we'll just create a class. So my class name is teacher. You can write any name, it's up to user interest. but let me make it very simple. So class teacher, I just define some multiple methods. Even you create a constructor or static method, it's up to user interest, but I'll just make sure I set an ID and I just get an ID. That means I'll make some methods to set the objects, that is to store the data into instances, then I retrieve the data. So for that reason, I'll just give the names as define set ID. So I just take the first argument as self. Then what do? I just take self dot id. So self dot id is equal to id. Because if you write id, what happens over there? Even it's a built-in function which stores the address. It's fine, no issues, because built-in functions can be taken as variable names. You might have checked that property. So demo of inheritance, where I'll be doing in two different files, where I clearly mentioned so this is one kind of taking point from user, because I just wanted to make sure how does this is developed by one programmer and another programmer will build the same feature and he run in another way. I'll just combine both the things. That's where we are just trying to do now. So first is we are defining set id, and then I just need to get that method, right? What do? I just define get id, and the first argument is always obviously self to carry the memory address. Then what you need to return here? Obviously, you need to return self id, that is self dot id. That's simple. Then again, let me set name, get name, then set address, get address. I want to just make it very simple. Even you can write in your own way, but I'm just trying to use the set methods and get methods here very simply. So I just define self comma name, and then so self dot name is equal to name. And what is the method to retrieve it? Define get name, because set name, get name, you can easily access it, right? So self, and again you just need to return, because you can write you can write any number of methods within the class. It's up to user interest. So self dot name, that is for getting names, set name, get name. Then what do? I just need to set address, right? I want to also take address from the user. So whether it can be integer or float, we did not mention it, right? So you need not worry. So self comma address, then you just need to give self dot address is equal to address. So that's where you are storing this. And how do you retrieve that methods? You just define, we just gave get id, get name, and now we just need to go for get address. Make it very simple, but just make sure don't give any spelling mistakes in the variable names or method names, because we'll be accessing them in another file. So I just define it as return self dot address. So first we gave get address, then we are giving set address. First we gave self address, then we are giving get address. So my intention is to make it very simple how we access all of them. So name, ID, address. Even if you want to also mention salary, what do you define over there? You just define get salary. You can define any number of methods, but make it very simple. I wanted to access them in another file, because I want to just revise the concept of modules which we have discussed. So how do you define? Self dot salary is equal to salary, because I just wanted to access them not from this file by creating an object, where when the programmer wants to use this teacher class, that is available in another file, because that's where when you go for application deployment, you have all the files in the same location, whether your HTML files or whatever your files, front-end files and the back-end program files. If you have any awareness of that, it will be same. That's where we store, because when you create a folder, what does that mean? You're keeping all the same files in that location, right? That's the same concept here. So get salary. So sorry, here it is set salary, right? Because we are giving the salary. Now you need to get salary. That's the same simple name, so that we can easily remember them when we initialize it. So I just written here set salary, return self dot salary. That's it. So get id, get id, set name, get name, set address, get address, set salary, get salary. Very good. Now I have just saved it as teacher.py. Now I'll open a new file. Just you can give Ctrl+N, or you can just go for file, new file. And how do I access that? You just save this any other name. I just save it as INH, inheritance, to make it very simple. Now I just try to use teacher class. How do you use that? You know, right? How do you first do? You just import teacher. So how do you use the teacher class? From teacher, because what is your method name over there? You can just remember the class name is teacher. Then how do you access it? Because if you have already remembered the concept of modules, when you have run the file as a Python file, the name will be saved as main, but now the file name will be saved as teacher because that is a module. So from teacher, what do? You just import teacher class. That's where you are just taking it. Save, because if you want to just check it out, what I'll do is I'll just print here. I'll just define print of double underscore name double underscore. So now save and I execute this. What you are getting? You are getting main function. But what I do here it is, I just run it here. I just give print of double underscore name double underscore. So I'll save this and I'll execute this. Now what you are seeing here? Teacher, because you are running it as module, right? So that is where you find the difference, which we have already studied about that part. So I just gave a recap of it. Now what do I try to do? I just create an instance where I initialize the teacher object here. So teacher is equal to any object here. I give t is equal to teacher, so that we are able to access all that methods now. So save this, and when you execute this, you can directly see you are seeing teacher because I gave the print as name, right? In the original file I gave print of double underscore name. So I just keep this as comment because I just wanted to give as a recap for you. Now when you save and execute this, just go for directory of t. When you execute this file, there you go. You see all the methods: get address, get id, get name, get salary. Good. Now let's access each one of them. That's how the programmer wants to access it. First, he wants to store the data. He just wanted to store the data into the instance. How just he wanted to store? Just he wanted to give t dot. First he wanted to set the id, because if I want to get the id, first I should set the id, right? I just set the id as 1, and then I want to set the name, pass everything, then only we can access it. Set name, I just give my name because it is clearly telling you should mention name. Then after giving name, what we need to give? So then I just set address or salary, it's up to you. So I just set the address as Vijayawada. You can give your own anything because it's up to user interest. We did not mention anything like you should give only integer, you should give only float value. It's up to user input. So when I set salary, I just set the salary as 35,000. Now I have just stored the data into the instances. Then how do I retrieve it? You just initialize the other methods: get id, get name, get address, get salary. So you just retrieve the data. It's simple, right? That's what we have done. That's you need to just revise. How do we have learnt about the concept of modules and what we are doing? This is the format, or this is the way how the packages are being built. It is just how do we go for the logic. So same method, I just give print of IDs. So print of IDs, how do you call them? You just use a method t dot. How to get the ID? You just give get ID method, and then you just go for print of name is. How do you call the method? Same, t dot. Instead of set name, you just need to go for get name. It is clearly giving you hints over there. Then if you want to set the address or get the address of it, already we have set the address. We can give address is colon. You can customize it. If you want to see in a better way, you can just give your own way. It's up to you. I just giving in a some normal way. Get address, and I just want to see the salary also. What is the salary over there? So salary is colon, comma. I just wanted to give t dot get salary. So we can see the result over there. Now, if I want to see the salary, I just give get salary. Now clearly, I should get for ID 1, For name Sakit, for address Vijayawada, salary is 35,000. Let me see, when I execute this, I should be able to see. Set ID takes one position argument but two were given. Why? Let me cross check where I have gone wrong, because set ID, let me just go for the main file, set ID, so self.id is equal to ID. So that is where when you go for self, see, for set ID, did you give any other argument over there? That's where you are making it wrong. So now you can clearly go ahead, because for name we gave, for set address we gave, because we are not defining constructor here. We defined our own methods. That is the reason it is throwing you. It takes only one positional argument. Self is taken as the argument over there. Now you can execute this, save, and when you execute this, clearly you can see that is the reason we define constructor. If you don't define, just make sure whatever the variables you are passing, that should be passed into the next method. So that is the reason we got error in the previous. That you should learn from errors and what made you to correct from that. So this is how we have defined a teacher module and how we are able to access all of them. And in the same way, if another programmer wants to use the same features, because in our teacher module, what we have defined, we have taken. So we have completed everything. We are getting the IDs, we are getting names, we are getting address, we are getting salary, everything. So there is no problem and it is accessible to every person, whoever using this teacher class. But now another programmer in the same team, suppose he wanted to create another class but not teacher. He want to create a student class. Okay. Now I'll go for creating a new program. But what I want to do is, I just try to write the same logic. So I can make it as, this is student class. So this is student class. But what I like to give is, it is version 1.0, something like Chitty 1.0 or anything, simple to say. So I just name it as student. Good. Now I do a very simple thing. I just create a class as student. So make it very simple. So when you create the class as student, we are trying to give the demo for same inheritance, but I am just making it in another way. How do you access it? So I just give demo for another type. Now I'll pass all the same methods. So set ID, get ID, set name. So instead of writing it again, I just do a smart work. You can also do your own way. So instead of writing everything, what I do? I just copy every method over here and I just paste it, because it's an interest of another programmer who wants to use all the methods, but he's writing the program again. I mean, he is not aware. So he is writing everything again. So he has given set ID, get ID, almost every feature. Even you want to give. So let's change something, because student will not have salary, right? So ID is same, name is same, address is same. So let's make some changes here. Instead of salary, let's give marks for students. It will be easier, right? So let's give marks. So in place of salary, replace that thing as marks. So self.marks is equal to marks. Because I just wanted to make some changes, because the other programmer, as we are taking an example of real case scenario, right? So here, the other programmer has created another module in this way. I mean, so he wanted to access the student details. Fine. So get ID, set name, get name, and self address, get address, set marks, get marks. Only the thing is, he has created a student class and he has saved in student.py. So now teacher.py and student.py are resembling something same, but in place of salary, we have given it as marks. Okay, fine. Now, how do I access it? So again, I will create a new file, and in the same way, I have just named it as, I want to use the student class. So what do? I just name this file, any name. So I just make it as INNH, but how do I access it? So from student, because now that has become as a module. So from student, you import the student class. It's simple. Now same, create an instance. So create instance, the same thing. So in place of yes, in place of T, what we are giving? Student. And now we can just get the instances. So let me save, and when I execute this, when I go for directory of yes, obviously I should be able to see every method. So get ID, set ID, and now the new things which are get marks and set marks. That's where you can find some difference over there. Now, let me, instead of writing everything, what I can do? So, I'll just store everything here. I'll just replace some simple things because we are having same methods except the salary method. We are having the other method which is marks. So, I want to give the ID as, so set ID is, let me give the ID as 2 and instead of name Saket, I just give it as Raju and in place of Vijayawada, let's give it as Hyderabad. So, any other name it's up to you, but we have just changed one simple thing. Now, we are giving it as marks. So, when you go for set dot, but clearly can you see it's not yes, it's not T, it should be yes because we have created instance for student class here. So, now when you go for yes dot, so we have given set ID, set name, set address and in place of now you need to set the marks also. Just pass the marks here something like 850. Now instead of T dot get ID, just give yes dot get ID, yes dot get name, yes dot get address. Now finally just make sure you need to pass, instead of setting the marks, just pass get marks so that you can see the result. Finally it's clear. Now let me try to save and execute this. You should be able to fetch all the results. So ID is 2, name is Raju, address is Hyderabad, salary is 850. Sorry, it's not salary, right? Let's change it in the print because I just made a smart work of copying all the methods because we have only changed one method because clearly that programmer is unaware of the previous class. So he has just created the same thing, but he has added extra thing. Instead of salary, he has given as marks. Now clearly you can see it. Why should we define both the classes? Why should we define both different classes in different files? Why can't we access them within the same file? Yes, we can do that. So that's where the concept of inheritance will come into picture. So make it very simple. We have clearly defined each and every method. So for get methods, we are taking input. For set methods, we are clearly retrieving the results. So now we'll understand how do we use the concept of inheritance and how do we extract those properties. So that is where the reusable mechanisms will play a very vital role.